The immense, echoing void of the grand assembly chamber of the tripolar concordance pulsed with a light that was not illumination, but rather the focused emanations of thought. A heavy, oppressive silence broken only by the infinitesimal, high-frequency hum of the gravity nullification conduits that kept the kilometer-wide obsidian disk of the Praetorium suspended above the galactic map mosaic. It was here in this impossible space that the fate of the concordance, a dominion of 3 stellar empires and countless vassal species stretching across a dense arm of the spiral, was being weighed against the single, incomprehensible variable that had intruded upon their cosmological certainty. The species designated Sol 3, the Terrans. The Praetor, a towering, chitinous form of the Krill ascendancy named Xyler, whose facial sensory plates were locked into an expression of deep, almost geological fatigue, shifted his mass, the sound a low, grating echo in the engineered stillness and the collective focus of the assembled delegates. The stoic, 8-limbed Cathar warlords, the fluid, hyper-intellectualized Zidonian diplomats, and the myriad of others, tightened around the central projection. A simple, unadorned ship design, unnervingly sleek, designated anomalous vessel, Type T7. The Cathar delegate, Supreme General Vrock, a being whose entire existence was predicated upon the calculation of risk and the application of overwhelming force, broke the protracted silence with a resonance that felt like shattered crystal. We have observed the Sol incursion for the span of 3 concordance cycles. Their advance is not a military thrust. It is a meticulous, illogical creep. They do not seize systems of strategic value. They colonize the marginal, the unstable, the systems where the stellar flux is chaotic and the gravity wells are temperamental. They do not engage our border patrols. They ignore them, their vessels holding a trajectory of such unnerving precision that conflict is rendered a procedural error on our part. Their movement is the expansion of a geological process, a slow, inevitable pressure, and they communicate only when absolutely necessary, and then only in formalized, excruciatingly polite declarations of intent, declarations that speak of survey, of stability, and of long-term ethical projection. This is the behavior of a foe that does not acknowledge the validity of our power structure, a foe that sees the grand, meticulously engineered concordance as a temporary atmospheric anomaly. Their calm is the most aggressive act we have ever encountered. His voice, naturally low and guttural, gained a frantic, desperate edge that was amplified by the chamber's acoustic focus. They have proven impervious to our standard psychological deterrents, those calibrated sonic fields designed to induce disorientation and the localized cascading of panic. Their vessels pass through the zones of influence as if they were nothing more than static interference. The data is clear. They do not experience the predictable psychological fear responses common to all known sentient life forms, or they have engineered that response out of their very being. Either interpretation demands immediate preemptive neutralization. To wait is to allow the disease of their unpredictable presence to metastasize throughout our established order. Praetor Xyler's response was slow, measured, the cadence of a being who had witnessed the rise and fall of empires built on certainty. General Vrock, your analysis, while rooted in the foundational principles of Cathar strategic doctrine, lacks the necessary philosophical depth to assess a species that defies the established taxonomy of galactic aggression. Aggression, as defined by the concordance mandates, is a response to perceived threat or a drive for resource acquisition. The Terrans exhibit neither. We have offered them resource-rich systems under the guise of treaty. They politely declined, stating their current developmental trajectory required only the systematic management of volatile environments. We have projected overwhelming force in their path. They acknowledge the presence of our fleet dispositions and maintain their course, altering speed only by the necessary fraction to avoid incidental collision. Their response to threat is not fight or flight. It is adaptation and persistence. You fear their lack of fear, General, but I fear their logic. Their ethics are alien, their drive is inscrutable, and their technology, which we can only imperfectly scan, suggests a fundamental rejection of our most basic physics. The Krill ascendancy advocates for deeper contact, for a controlled, risk-managed understanding of the human psychological core, before we commit to the irreversible violence that preemption entails. They are not animals to be culled. They are a variable to be solved. The Praetor's massive, jointed manipulator gestures towards a secondary projection, one showing complex, shifting gravitational tides of the contested sector known as the Veiled Nebula, a space that was not a void, but a churning maelstrom of barely contained dark matter and rogue stellar remnants. It was here that the latest, most unsettling encounter was predicted. The Zidonian voice, synthesized into the chamber's language by a hovering sphere of perfectly smooth, mirrored metal, was a whisper of pure, cold reason. The Terran Protectorate's insistence on establishing a research outpost within the Veiled Nebula is the core of the enigma. That region is an entropic sink, unstable, resource-poor, and strategically irrelevant to any civilization operating under the assumption of energy conservation. They claim it is the ideal environment for studying resilience engineering and bioharmonic stabilization. The translation of these concepts is inconsistent with military or economic objectives. It speaks of a species that finds intrinsic value not in the accumulation of wealth or power, but in the mastery of existential difficulty. This is a terrifying thought, a species that chooses hardship as its pathway to strength. General Vrock wishes to deploy the full might of the Concordance fleet in a catastrophic deterrent action. The Krill wish to engage in a delicate philosophical exchange. We, the Zidonian Consensus, propose a single, decisive, psychologically targeted probe. If they are truly impervious to fear, then they are fundamentally incompatible with galactic interaction and must be isolated, perhaps even excised. If they can be made to feel the primal terror that binds all intelligent life, then we have a common ground for negotiation, however tenuous. We must test the limits of their psychological architecture. The suggestion hung in the air, a poisonous, undeniable necessity. To risk open war was unthinkable. To allow an unfearful entity to operate within their borders was an invitation to political and spiritual collapse. The test was granted. A single, specialized Cathar cruiser, the Harvester of Dread, equipped with the most refined and ethically questionable concordance technology, the psychogenic phobiaspore dispersal system, was authorized to execute a non-lethal, high-intensity psychological engagement in the Veiled Nebula, a surgical strike against the Terran mind, not their technology. ACTII Human Reveal. Deep within the churning, chaotic electromagnetic interference of the Veiled Nebula, where the constant spatial distortions threaten to shear the hull plates of any vessel not shielded by the highest-grade concordance gravitic fields, the Terran vessel, the TFS Resilient Forge, maintained its station with an unnerving stillness. It was a utilitarian monument of gray-black composite, angular, devoid of the sweeping elegance of concordance naval design. Its exterior lacked the shimmering, multi-layered bioaegis shields that were standard protection for the concordance, relying instead on a series of thick, reactive armor plates and an internal, complex array of harmonic dampeners that seemed to absorb the worst of the nebula's spatial tantrums without effort. On board, the atmosphere was one of quiet, almost meditative industry. In the central engineering nexus, a space of exposed conduit and meticulously organized chaos, senior field technician Kalen Vance, a man whose hands bore the fine, calloused marks of deep space labor, and whose eyes held the distant, quiet focus of one who understood the silent laws of thermodynamics and cosmic indifference, was conducting a scheduled check of the primary plasma manifold. His movements were precise, economical, and utterly devoid of the stress that the environment should have induced. The alarm, when it sounded, was not a shrieking klaxon, but a low, pleasant chime that vibrated through the deck plating, accompanied by a calm, synthesized voice. "Attention! Proximity alert! Unidentified concordance vessel, Class Dread, entering mandated research periphery. Velocity suggests non-standard approach profile. Recommend Level 3 readiness. Maintain course. Maintain task." Kalen Vance did not flinch, did not pause his diagnostic sequence. He simply acknowledged the notification with a soft tap on his wrist-mounted terminal. The concordance vessel, the Harvester of Dread, commanded by the Cathar General Vrock's nephew, Commander Zydos, was closing fast, its organic steel hull pulsing faintly with the charge of its intended weapons system. Zydos was not acting under the full mandate of the Praetorium, driven by the Cathar's institutionalized fear and a deep-seated belief in the superiority of their psychological warfare doctrine. He had interpreted the Zidonian probe order as a license for maximal deterrent application. His internal monologue was a cascade of justification. They are calm because they are oblivious. They have not yet seen the true face of the void. We shall provide the mirror. On the bridge of the Harvester of Dread, Commander Zydos tracked the Resilient Forge. Its utter lack of evasive maneuver or even defensive activation was insulting, a silent declaration of contempt for his vessel's destructive potential. They do not acknowledge us even at this proximity, Zydos hissed to his weapons master. Their arrogance is a toxin. Prepare the Phobiaspor deployment. Calibrate for maximum existential dread and localized temporal displacement anxiety. We must shatter the scaffolding of their composure. We shall know their true face of terror. The weapons master, a nervous, four-eyed subordinate, hesitated. Commander, the parameters specified by the Zidonian probe were for a low-intensity stimulus purely diagnostic. A maximal dispersal risks permanent psychological fracture, an irreversible consequence. Zydos slammed a jointed fist onto the command console, the sound a sharp, sickening crack. Fracture is the intended outcome. If they are a threat to the Concordance, better they be rendered inert psychological casualties than an active existential peril. Execute the dispersal. Saturate the Terran vessel's projected atmospheric field now. Phobiaspor deployment was a silent, invisible terror. It was not a physical gas, but a highly refined, low-frequency psychoactive neural agent, aerosolized and carried by a targeted, short-range gravimetric pulse, designed to penetrate all but the most specialized molecular shielding. Once within the atmospheric envelope of the Terran ship, the Phobiaspors would bond with oxygen carriers in the air, and upon inhalation enter the central nervous system, bypassing the standard biofilters. Their function was to hijack the emotional centers of the brain, flooding the pathways with the purest, most concentrated neurochemical signature of terror and existential hopelessness, tailored to the specific neural architecture of the target species. It was the ultimate weapon of non-lethal incapacitation, a fate considered by the Concordance to be far worse than death. Absolute, unshakable madness. The Cathar vessel's sensors locked onto the resilient forge, preparing to record the inevitable, cascading scream of internal panic, the frantic, useless attempts at escape, the final, desperate plea for surrender that would surely follow. On the resilient forge, the air filtration systems registered the intrusion, not with an alarm, but with a slight, almost imperceptible shift in the internal atmosphere's texture, a faint metallic scent that Kalen Vance, in the engineering nexus, noted with detached professional curiosity. He paused his work not out of fear, but because the diagnostic readout on his screen registered a contaminant profile that was, structurally, beautifully malicious, a compound of engineered despair. He took a deep, measured breath, the instinctual response of a field technician assessing a novel environmental hazard. The Phobiaspors entered his system, crossing the blood-brain barrier with the calculated efficiency of a precision instrument. On the monitoring screens of the Harvester of Dread, the Cathar crew watched in a breathless silence. The Terran vessel's internal biosignatures were flooding the displays. The expected chaotic spiking of heart rates, the parabolic surge in adrenaline and cortisol, the telltale signature of neural collapse, none of it materialized. There was instead a slow, methodical filtering of the toxic influx. Kalen Vance's heart rate rose, but only by the statistical equivalent of a light jog. His cortisol levels registered a moderate spike, quickly dampened not by biological resistance, but by a higher-order neural processing that seemed to categorize the terror as data. On the bridge, Commander Zydos stared in horrified disbelief. The dosage increased the dispersal by a factor of 3, hit their core atmospheric reserves. They must be filtering it. Override the environmental controls. We must force the inhalation. The atmosphere of the resilient forge became dense with the Phobiaspor agent, a thick, suffocating wave of engineered panic. Kalen Vance felt the wave hit. It was not a feeling of dread. It was an argument in his mind, a forceful, undeniable projection of cosmic insignificance, of the futility of his existence, of the inevitable collapse of all he held dear. His rational mind, honed by years of surviving the brutal, unforgiving environments that humanity had chosen to master, did not argue against the premise of futility. It integrated it. It was a known variable, a constant of the universe. He closed his eyes, his breathing slowing, becoming deep, deliberate, an act of pure, conscious control. He did not fight the fear, he observed it. He recognized the signature of profound, existential despair, and understood it not as an emotion, but as a temporary, unstable energy state introduced from an external source. A feed from a small, auxiliary diagnostic drone, positioned near the resilient forge's external airlock, a feed TH. Humans deliberately left unencrypted as a silent, contemptuous gesture of transparency, flickered onto the Cathar command screen. It showed Kalen Vance in the near-saturated air of the engineering nexus. His face was pale, his eyes wide and focused, but there was no panic, only an intense, analytical concentration. The man was breathing deeply, taking the full measure of the chemical despair into his lungs, understanding the depth of the intended psychological wound. He looked directly at the drone's lens, his expression utterly serene, the image of a being who had reached a philosophical accommodation with the void itself. He extended one hand, placing it flat against the cold, scarred metal of the reactor casing, feeling the deep, silent thrum of the vessel's contained power. A single, low-frequency transmission, raw and unfiltered, was broadcast from the resilient forge directly into the Cathar surveillance buffer. The ship's communication system, interpreting Kalen Vance's internal-external synchronization, translated the complex, dense thought transfer into the closest linguistic equivalent in the Concordant's common tongue. The raw data, a blend of biofeedback, neural activity, and spoken words, filtered through the Cathar's combat protocol-driven translator array, which was designed to seek threats and assign primitive, aggressive labels to incomprehensible intent. The final, synthesized output, projected onto the bridge of the Harvester of Dread in monolithic, shocking script, was a philosophical declaration reduced to an almost childlike simplicity, stripped of its ethical context, yet carrying the weight of an unassailable truth. He strong ship is. The interpretation by the Cathar command was a cascade of catastrophic error. Zydos saw it as a defiant, almost psychotic boast of physical strength, a declaration of intent to fight, an acknowledgement that the fear had failed. But the senior medical officer, a non-Cathar from the vassal species of the Cygnus Compact, read the concurrent biodata that accompanied the signal. The human was not registering physical pain or anger, only an immense, concentrated, almost religious patience. The Cygnus officer managed a single, choked whisper before Zydos silenced him. "Commander, the full translation of the Terran sub-band wave. The resilience is not organic but structural, not individual but communal. We are the architects of our own stability. The vessel is the externalized will." He did not inhale the fear and reject it. He inhaled the fear and categorized it. The ship is not strong physically. The ship is strong philosophically. They have internalized the existential threat and built their identity around its mastery. The failure of the psychogenic phobiaspore was not a technical malfunction. It was a psychological and ethical annihilation of the Concordance's fundamental assumption. That fear was the universal common denominator of sentient life. Humanity had engineered its capacity for contextualizing fear. They had looked into the void, categorized it, and built a ship, a society, around the principle of enduring its cold indifference. Commander Zydos, recognizing the profound, career-ending failure of the engagement, ordered an immediate panicked retreat. The Harvester of Dread, its purpose utterly invalidated, disengaged its gravitic clamp and fled the veiled nebula, leaving the TFS resilient forge entirely alone, perfectly calm, and meticulously engaged in the systematic management of a hostile, chaotic environment, its silent declaration of resilience echoing across the empty space between the stars. The reverberations of the incident in the veiled nebula were not merely political, they were metaphysical. The Praetorium chamber, once again convened, was no longer a forum for debate, but a silent crucible of existential reevaluation. The Cathar, having witnessed the spectacular, humiliating collapse of their most potent psychological deterrent, were chastened, their aggression replaced by a cold, calculating uncertainty. General Vrock, his posture stiff with internal conflict, conceded the strategic failure. The Terrans are not merely immune to the phobiaspore agent, they utilize the phobiaspore agent. They absorbed the most potent manifestation of engineered existential dread and processed it as diagnostic information. Commander Zydos's recording, though crudely translated in the field, speaks not of physical defense, but of an ethical, structural will. If the strength of their ship is a metaphor for the strength of their spirit, then we are dealing with a species of terrifying, self-imposed mental discipline. Praetor Xyler of the Krill Ascendancy finally allowed the collective weight of the moment to settle, his massive sensory plates relaxing slightly, the tension in the chamber releasing like a slow, deliberate exhalation. The Cathar assumption was that all life desires comfort and safety above all else. The Terran data contradicts this. Their historical records, which we have now been permitted to access under the new provisional contact protocols, reveal a species that survived multiple, self-inflicted near-extinction events, a species that systematically culled its own capacity for non-rational, self-destructive panic. Their great filter, as they term their own history, was not an external cosmic event, but the brutal internal process of choosing logic and measured action over chaos and emotional excess. They did not conquer fear with courage. They rendered fear irrelevant through discipline. They are the ultimate product of selective pressure, a species that chooses hardship because hardship guarantees the removal of weakness. We sent a weapon of fear. They returned a philosophical statement of self-mastery. The consequence is clear. They are not a threat to be neutralized. They are a complexity to be aligned with. The Zidonian consensus, via its shimmering avatar, presented the final, synthesized data point that irrevocably shifted the political landscape. The Terran Protectorate has not only agreed to a full diplomatic summit at the neutral zone of Cygnus 14, but they have also offered a complete, open-source schematic of the resilient Forge's unique dampening technology, the internal harmonics of its reactive plating, which allowed it to shrug off the nebula's chaos. Their stated reason, the systematic hoarding of critical technology in the face of shared environmental hostility, is not conducive to long-term galactic stability. They treat the disclosure of their most advanced defense systems as a matter of ethical principle, not strategic negotiation. Their logic is unassailable. If all life is threatened by the same entropic forces of the universe, then withholding the solution is an act of galactic treason. Their power is not in their weaponry, but in the overwhelming, devastating correctness of their ethical framework. We must approach them not as potential adversaries, but as necessary partners in a universe we now know to be far more hostile than we previously assumed. The diplomatic summit at Cygnus 14 was conducted not in a grand, intimidating concordant structure, but aboard a neutral, open framework orbital station built by the Terrans, a construct of clean lines, vast, clear observation ports, and an entirely self-sustaining, closed-loop ecological system that was a masterpiece of controlled entropy. The Terran delegation was led by the chief diplomat, Ambassador Selene Reese, a woman whose calm, composed demeanor was the physical embodiment of the philosophical resilience witnessed in the Veiled Nebula. She sat opposite Praetor Xyler, Vrock, and the Zidonian Avatar, her expression a mirror of patient, unshakable confidence. Kalen Vance, the technician from the Resilient Forge, was also present, his quiet presence serving as a subtle, physical reminder of the cost and nature of human strength. Praetor Xyler, Ambassador Reese began, her voice low, melodious, and perfectly level, amplified only to the necessary degree. The incident in the Veiled Nebula, which your command personnel initiated with the deployment of a highly effective psychological deterrent, served as a profound, if unwelcome, point of contact. We do not condemn the action. We understand the fear that drove it. Your concordance, like any enduring galactic structure, is built on a shared assumption of commonality, including the commonality of basic emotional response. When a species defies that foundational principle, the reaction is predictably xenophobic. Our presence here is not to demand retribution, but to offer context. General Vrock, still grappling with the Cathar concept of honor in the face of psychological defeat, posed the crucial question. Your people, Terran, inhaled the despair of the Phobiaspor agent. You felt the raw, existential terror of insignificance, the chemical truth of your own inevitable demise. Why did you not collapse? Why was your response a declaration of will, not a scream of panic? Ambassador Reese inclined her head, a gesture of respect that was simultaneously a statement of inherent superiority. General, you operate under the assumption that we must fight the truth of our mortality. We do not. For millennia, humanity has stared into the ultimate, unblinking void of the cosmos. We acknowledge that we are cosmically insignificant, that the entropy of the universe is an unassailable truth, and that our existence is statistically improbable and inherently temporary. We survived our own adolescent, violent history by internalizing this truth. The fear you projected was not a revelation to us. It was a statement of fact that we have already integrated into our philosophical operating system. The strength of the Resilient Forge, which Field Technician Vance correctly articulated, is that it is a physical manifestation of this philosophical commitment. It is a vessel designed not to escape the chaos of the nebula, but to endure it. The strength is the patience to repair, the logic to adapt, and the collective will to continue the designated task despite the ultimate futility. We do not run from the entropy. We choose to build structures of temporary, localized order within it. That is the Terran definition of resilience. This explanation, dense with philosophical gravity, forced the Praetorium delegates to confront the limits of their own cultural assumptions. The Zidonian Avatar, its surface swirling with complex mathematical patterns representing its own internal processing, offered a synthesis. The Terran species has already passed the ultimate test. Their great filter was the internalization of the inevitability of fear and the transcendence of its motivational utility. They are not merely brave. They are functionally unafraid because their ethical core is anchored to the task, the objective pursuit of knowledge and the maintenance of stability, not the outcome, the ultimate inevitable heat-death of the universe. This is a terrifying, yet profoundly stable foundation for a galactic power. The conversation deepened, shifting from a negotiation of power to an exchange of fundamental ethical and cosmological views. The Terrans revealed their true, long-term strategic objective, and this was the large-scale reveal that shattered the remaining Concordance arrogance. They were not merely surveying chaotic systems for resilience engineering. They were tracking a phenomenon far outside the known operational volume of the Concordance, a massive, accelerating decay wave that was subtly manipulating the background cosmic microwave radiation, and more disturbingly, interfering with the stable psychic projections of all neurologically complex life forms in the local galactic cluster. The instability you perceive in the veiled nebula, Ambassador Reese explained, her gaze fixed on the galactic-scale projection the Terrans had brought, one far more detailed than the Concordance S, is a localized symptom, a minor ripple. The source of the true instability is far beyond our current shared borders, in the sector we call the Outer Shroud. She brought up the projection of the Shroud, a vast region previously dismissed by the Concordance as an impenetrable dark matter void. We have been tracking its fluctuations for centuries. Our initial expansion into volatile systems was not a quest for resources. It was the methodical establishment of sensor arrays and predictive modeling outposts. We did not want to alarm the more emotionally reactive galactic powers with incomplete data, preferring to contain the spread of panic until the full nature of the threat was understood. ACTIII, unity and larger twist. The Terran data streamed into the central Concordance nexus, bypassing the need for physical transfer. A silent, breathtaking display of technological superiority presented with the utmost ethical neutrality. The image coalesced. The outer shroud was not a natural void. It was rather the deteriorating shell of a colossal, incomprehensibly ancient stellar megastructure, a vast, derelict Dyson sphere-like edifice known in Terran historical archives only as the Ethel construct. This structure, built by a precursor race that existed in a hyperdimensional state now unattainable by current civilizations, had been a cosmic beacon of contained order. But it was dying. Its complex woven space superstructure was failing, and its collapse was generating subtle, cascading ripples of non-local chaos, brief, disruptive temporal shears, and most critically, a background wash of psychic entropy. A subtle, constant influx of pure, unfiltered, systemic paranoia and xenophobia that had been subtly conditioning the emotional state of all developing species in the region for millennia. Peter Zeiler felt the cold grip of a truth far more profound than mere military threat. The Concordance's history of petty wars, its deep-seated institutionalized distrust, the Cathar's reliance on fear as a weapon, the very nervous energy that defined the galactic political landscape, all of it, an unwitting response to the failing psychic dampeners of a dead god's construct. The Concordance's xenophobia was not a cultural trait. It was an environmental illness. The Phobiaspor agent, the Zidonian avatar synthesized, its voice now tinged with a profound, terrifying awe, was not just a chemical weapon. It was an amplifier of the background psychic entropy generated by the Ethel construct. When you used it on the Terrans, they were not only fighting your chemical assault, but a 1,000-year accumulation of cosmic engineered paranoia, and they processed it as data. They built a ship whose strength was its resilience against a universal, external source of chaos. Ambassador Reese confirmed the existential revelation. The Terran Protectorate's first great ethical mandate, established after our near collapse, was to never inflict upon Anoth, our species, the suffering we had inflicted upon ourselves. When we discovered the influence of the Ethel construct's entropic decay, we realized the greatest threat to galactic civilization was not external invasion, but internal dissolution driven by cosmic accident. Our methodical, quiet expansion was merely the quiet construction of a containment field, a shield of rational minds designed to understand and counter the psychic wave, preventing the premature, fear-driven collapse of the younger, more reactive civilizations. We were not invading your space, Preter. We were guarding it. We risked your initial hostility rather than revealing the nature of the cosmic threat, and precipitating a galaxy-wide panic that would have been the Ethel construct's final, unintended triumph. General Vrock, his chitinous frame now radiating a silent, cold determination, finally grasped the true nature of human power. The strength of the resilient forge was the quiet, terrifying strength of self-sacrifice and ethical commitment, the willingness to be misunderstood, feared, and even attacked for the greater good of an unknowing galaxy. The humans had already survived the cosmic paranoia that the Concordance was only now beginning to perceive. Their lack of fear was not a biological flaw. It was a necessary, self-imposed ethical shield. "You chose," Vrock stated, his voice a low, gravelly whisper stripped of all former arrogance, "to be the pariah, the anomalous threat, so that the true enemy, the cosmic disorder, would not be prematurely revealed and cause the panic you sought to prevent. You embraced the short-term necessary conflict with us, the Concordance, to buy time against the long-term existential threat of entropy. The logic is flawless. The ethics are incomprehensible, yet pure. The formal alliance was not a diplomatic document. It was a cosmological necessity. The Concordance, with its vast industrial capacity and massive fleet numbers, and the Terran Protectorate with its profound philosophical stability, its advanced predictive modeling, and its specialized resilience technology, had found a single, unifying purpose. They were no longer the Concordance and the Terrans. They were the nascent structure of the galactic community, standing together against the entropic decay of a previous age. The unified fleet, a mix of the Concordance's sleek, shielded vessels and the Terrans' stark, armor-plated ships, began its slow, methodical movement toward the outer shroud, a testament to a unity forged in fear and tempered by unexpected ethical revelation. The final scene took place not in a chamber of state, but on the bridge of the unified flagship, a massive, retrofitted Concordance vessel now bearing the insignia of the newly formed Galactic Stability Accord. Praetor Xyler and Ambassador Reese stood side by side, gazing out at the star field that was slowly, imperceptibly yielding to the cold, structured chaos of the shroud. Kalen Vance, now a crucial member of the technical team, was overseeing the deployment of the newly shared resilience dampeners, technology that had once been the sole secret of the resilient forge. "Ambassador," Xyler said, the weight of his ancient lineage heavy in his tone, "we nearly destroyed you. We deployed a weapon designed to induce absolute despair, a profound psychological violence, because we could not comprehend a species that did not prioritize its own emotional comfort. And you did not retaliate. You explained the logic of our own paranoia. You allowed us to see that the greatest evil is often not malice, but cosmic indifference, and that the only true strength is the will to persevere in the face of inevitable, objective futility. What does humanity seek now, at the edge of this ancient structure? What is the final frontier for a species that has already conquered the fear of its own meaninglessness?" Ambassador Reese turned from the viewport, her eyes reflecting the cold, distant light of the collapsing Ethel construct. Her expression was one of profound, quiet responsibility, the emotional gravity of her species, history condensed into a single glance. "Praetor, the universe is vast, and the fundamental law remains entropy. But the Ethel construct, despite its collapse, was a colossal act of creation, a moment where a predecessor race imposed a structure of order on the random chaos of the void. We go to the shroud not to defeat the entropy, which is impossible, but to learn from the collapse. We go to understand the methods of a species that managed to hold back the night for an era incomprehensible to us. Our final purpose is not survival, it is responsibility. We believe that in the heart of the shroud, within the final, failing core of the Ethel construct, there is an ancient signal, a final message left by the builders, a post-mortem analysis of their failure, a warning, or perhaps a final, ultimate principle of organization against the cosmic dissolution." She paused, looking toward the distant darkness where the megastructure lay dying, a beacon of failed ambition and immense knowledge. "We face the fear of the Phobiaspor. We face the fear of your fleet. We have faced the fear of our own history. The strength is not in the metal of the ship, General Vrock, nor is it in the velocity of the drive. The strength, the ultimate resilience, is the ethical commitment to carry a light forward, however small, however brief, into a darkness that is absolute. The ship is strong because we will it to be strong. We are here to receive that final message, to learn how to build a better, more ethical and more enduring will, a better ship, for the long night that we now know is coming for all of us together." The unified fleet moved in a silent, orderly phalanx towards the shroud. A single, flickering flame of logic and cooperative will against the unfeeling, collapsing shadow of an ancient cosmic order. The Concordance had found its terrifying, necessary truth. Humanity had found its purpose in the burden of guardianship. And the galaxy, for the first time, had found a quiet, profound unity, founded not on shared comfort, but on shared, acknowledged, and mastered fear. The resilience had been tested. The resilience had been proven. The final, silent work had begun.